Imagine driving down a dark road at midnight. Your headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but endless asphalt ahead. You check your rear-view mirror. Headlights were following you just moments ago. Now there's nothing. Complete darkness. You pull over, confused, heart racing. Where did they go? More importantly, where are you? What if I told you that across America, there are highways where people drive in and never return? Roads where families receive phone calls that end mid-sentence. Where cars are found abandoned with keys still in ignition, doors wide open, and no sign of their drivers. Roads where the missing person reports pile up year after year, and the only witnesses are shadows dancing in headlight beams. Tonight, we're uncovering America's most haunted and dangerous roads, stretches of asphalt where legend meets true crime, where ghost stories mask real disappearances, and where the line between supernatural terror and human evil becomes impossibly blurred. We'll walk the same paths where serial killers dump bodies, where families lost loved ones forever, and where even seasoned police officers refuse to patrol alone after dark. From the cursed highways of the Southwest to the body-dumping grounds of the Northeast, from desert roads where time itself seems to slip away to mountain passes where indigenous women vanish without a trace, these aren't just scary stories told around campfires. These are real places where real people disappeared, leaving behind real families who still search for answers decades later. But which of these roads holds the darkest secret? Which one has claimed the most lives? And why do some stretches of American highways seem to attract both paranormal activity and violent crime? Let's begin this journey into the heart of America's most terrifying roads. Our first stop takes us to the American Southwest, where a highway once bore the most ominous number possible, 666. Originally designated as U.S. Route 666, this cursed stretch of asphalt wound through New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado for over 60 years before officials, overwhelmed by reports of disappearances and accidents, renamed it U.S. Route 491 in 2003. But changing numbers couldn't erase the blood-soaked history of what locals still call the Devil's Highway. Sarah Martinez was driving home from her night shift at a Gallup diner in March 1998. Her husband expected her by 2 a.m. It was a drive she made hundreds of times along what was then Route 666. When she didn't arrive by morning, search parties scoured the desert. They found her car 3 days later, doors unlocked, purse intact, keys dangling from the ignition. Sarah was gone. No footprints leading away from the vehicle. No signs of struggle. Just empty desert stretching in every direction. Sarah wasn't alone. Between 1990 and 2003, over 200 people went missing along Route 666, a rate nearly 3 times higher than comparable highways. Truckers reported being followed by phantom headlights that would suddenly vanish. Travelers described seeing the same hitchhiker multiple times across impossible distances. Emergency responders grew familiar with calls about abandoned vehicles found in perfect condition, their drivers simply gone. Miguel Santos, a state trooper who patrolled the route for 15 years, kept detailed records that paint a disturbing picture. Every month, we'd find at least 2 or 3 cars, he recalls. Engines still running. Radio playing. Fast food still warm on the passenger seat. But no driver. It got to the point where even the most skeptical officers started carrying extra holy water. The accidents were just as mysterious. Fatal crashes occurred at rates that defied statistical explanation, often involving lone drivers who seemed to lose control on straight, clear stretches of road. Survivors, those few who lived through multi-vehicle accidents, reported seeing impossible things in their final moments. Headlights coming from the wrong direction, vehicles that seemed to phase through guardrails, faces in their windows that belonged to no one in the car. Local Navajo communities had warned about this stretch of land for generations, speaking of ancient burial grounds and disturbed spirits. But as the body count rose and the disappearances continued, even non-believers began to wonder if some roads are born cursed, marked by forces that transcend human understanding. The most chilling case occurred in November 2001. An entire family, Robert and Linda Chun, along with their twin daughters, vanished while driving from Denver to Phoenix. Their SUV was discovered a week later, perfectly parked at a rest stop along Route 666. Suitcases were neatly arranged in the back. The girls' toys were placed carefully on the seats. The gas tank was full, though it should have been nearly empty. Security cameras at nearby truck stops showed the vehicle approaching but never leaving. The Chen family was never seen again. But Route 666 is only the beginning. The next road on our journey makes the Devil's Highway look like a peaceful Sunday drive. Deep in the woods of West Milford, New Jersey, lies a 10-mile stretch of winding asphalt that locals call America's most haunted road. Clinton Road cuts through the darkest heart of the Pine Barrens, where ancient trees form a canopy so thick that even noon feels like twilight. But this isn't just another spooky road with ghost stories. It's a real-life crime scene that spans decades. The road earned its deadly reputation to the work of Richard Kuklinski, better known as the Iceman, one of America's most prolific contract killers. Between 1948 and 1986, Kuklinski murdered over 100 people, and Clinton Road became his preferred disposal site. In recorded confessions, he described the road's perfect isolation. 10 miles of nothing but trees and darkness. You could scream for hours and nobody would hear you. Kuklinski wasn't the only one who discovered Clinton Road's sinister potential. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, hikers regularly stumbled upon human remains scattered throughout the surrounding woods. Police reports from that era read, like a catalog of horrors: skulls found by Boy Scout troops, skeletal hands discovered by hunters, bodies in various stages of decomposition turning up after every major storm. Detective Frank Romano worked these cases for over 2 decades. We stopped counting after the 50th body, he admits. Clinton Road wasn't just a dumping ground. It was like a mass grave that stretched for miles. And the worst part? We knew there were dozens more we'd never find. The road's reputation for violence attracted other predators. In 1988, a teenage couple parked at one of the road's secluded turnoffs simply vanished. Their car was found 2 days later, but Jennifer Walsh and Marcus Torres were never seen again. Blood evidence suggested a violent struggle, but their bodies have never been recovered, despite search teams combing every inch of the surrounding forest. Local police officers developed an unwritten rule about Clinton Road: never patrol it alone after dark. Officer Patricia Vance learned why during her first solo night shift. "I was checking on an abandoned vehicle around 1 a.m. She remembers. "As I approached the car, I heard footsteps in the woods. Lots of them, like a crowd of people walking through the trees. But when I shined my flashlight, there was nothing, just empty forest. Then my radio started picking up voices, old conversations, like they were echoing from somewhere else." The paranormal reports weren't limited to police. Drivers regularly called 911 claiming to see figures standing in the road who would vanish when approached. Others reported their cars being followed by an old pickup truck that would disappear around curves. The most persistent legend involved a bridge at the road's midpoint, where a young boy allegedly died decades earlier. Visitors who threw coins into the water below claimed the boy would throw them back, a harmless ghost story that masked the bridge's real horror. In 1994, construction workers repairing that same bridge made a grisly discovery: human bones embedded in the concrete supports, suggesting someone had been murdered during the bridge's original construction in the 1920s. DNA testing was impossible due to the bone's condition, but dental records eventually identified the remains as belonging to Thomas Kellaway, a construction foreman who had supposedly quit and moved to California in 1923. What makes Clinton Road truly terrifying isn't just the number of bodies found there. It's how the legends and folklore seem to provide perfect cover for real killers. While people focus on ghost stories and supernatural encounters, actual murderers use the road's reputation to mask their crimes. Who would believe a witness who claimed to see something suspicious on a road everyone knew was haunted? But what if the legends weren't just ghost stories masking real crimes? What if they covered up something even worse? Our next chapter takes us beyond isolated incidents to examine a nationwide pattern of highway disappearances that has federal investigators baffled. America's highways have become hunting grounds for a specific type of predator: the long-haul trucker turned serial killer. The FBI's Highway Serial Killings Initiative, launched in 2009, has identified over 500 victims and more than 200 suspects connected to murders along interstate trucking routes. These aren't random crimes. They're part of a coordinated pattern of violence that turns our nation's road system into a 47,000-mile crime scene. The statistics are staggering. Every year, approximately 400 people vanish from truck stops, rest areas, and highway shoulders across America. Most are never found. Those who are discovered often bear signs of prolonged torture, suggesting their killers kept them alive for days or weeks before disposing of their bodies along remote stretches of highway. Truck stops have become particularly dangerous hunting grounds. These sprawling complexes, isolated between cities and operating 24 hours a day, attract vulnerable populations, hitchhikers seeking rides, sex workers servicing truckers, and travelers who've broken down or run out of money. Predators blend seamlessly into the transient community of legitimate drivers, using their vehicles as mobile torture chambers and their knowledge of remote roads as disposal routes. The case of Bruce Mendenhall illustrates how these killers operate. Between 2001 and 2007, this long-haul trucker murdered at least 6 women across multiple states, storing their belongings in his cab as trophies while dumping their bodies at truck stops along his regular routes. What made Mendenhall particularly dangerous wasn't just his mobility. It was how he exploited the anonymity of highway travel. State jurisdictions rarely communicate effectively, so patterns that might be obvious to a single detective become invisible when spread across dozens of police departments. Melissa Bradley was last seen at a Flying J truck stop in Oklahoma in 2015. Security footage shows her accepting a ride from an unknown trucker after a car broke down. Her body was found 3 weeks later beside Interstate 40 in Arkansas, nearly 200 miles away. By the time investigators connected her disappearance to the discovery site, the killer could have been anywhere in the lower 48 states. The most disturbing aspect of highway serial killings is how they exploit America's cultural blind spots. Missing persons from truck stops often fall through bureaucratic cracks. Victims written off as voluntary disappearances or assumed to be involved in illegal activities. Families report being told their loved ones probably just moved on or got into the wrong crowd. This institutional dismissal gives killers more time to operate and destroys evidence that might otherwise lead to arrests. FBI behavioral analyst Sarah Matthews has spent years tracking these patterns. Highway killers understand something we're only beginning to grasp, she explains. Interstate travel creates perfect opportunities for predation. Victims are isolated from their support networks. Local police have limited jurisdiction, and the sheer scale of the highway system makes comprehensive investigation nearly impossible. The emotional toll on families is devastating. Patricia Williams has spent 8 years searching for her daughter Amanda, who vanished from an I-75 truck stop in Georgia. Every time I drive past a truck on the highway, I wonder if that's the one, she says. I wonder if he's in there right now, thinking about what he did to my little girl. The not knowing is torture, but somehow not looking would be worse. But sometimes it's not just human killers we should fear on America's highways. Sometimes it's the road itself that seems to reach out and claim victims. Some roads earn their terrifying reputations over time. Others seem born with darkness already embedded in their very names. Shades of Death Road, winding through rural New Jersey for just 7 miles, carries a title that local historians claim dates back to the 1920s. Though the reason for the name remains hotly debated and deeply disturbing. The official explanation involves 3 separate incidents from the road's early history, a series of violent robberies that left multiple travelers dead, a malaria outbreak that killed residents of nearby settlements, and several fatal accidents during the road's construction. But locals whisper about a 4th explanation, one that involves deliberate murder and bodies that were never found. In 1982, construction crews widening a section of Shades of Death Road made a discovery that validated the darkest local legends. Buried beneath what had been the original roadbed, workers uncovered the skeletal remains of at least 12 individuals. Forensic analysis suggested the bodies had been there since the 1920s or 1930s, and evidence of blunt force trauma indicated violent deaths. More disturbing still, the bodies had been carefully arranged in a pattern that suggested ritualistic killing. The discovery launched a cold case investigation that consumed Detective Raymond Parks, for over a decade. Every lead we followed led to more questions, he recalls. Property records from a 1920 show the land had been owned by a man named Cornelius Wickham, but he supposedly died in a house fire in 1934. The problem was, we could never find any record of that fire, or any death certificate, or any evidence Wickham ever actually existed. Modern disappearances along Shades of Death Road follow an unsettling pattern. Victims are always alone, always traveling at night, and always found days or weeks later in impossible locations. In 2003, college student David Chin broke down on the road after midnight. He called AAA for help, giving his exact location. When the tow truck arrived an hour later, David's car was gone. His body was discovered 3 months later in an abandoned well 12 miles away, despite multiple search teams having covered that area extensively. The most chilling recent case occurred in 2018. Rebecca Martinez, a nurse returned from her shift at a Newark hospital, experienced car trouble along Shades of Death Road around 2 a.m. Cell phone records show she made several calls to her husband, describing strange lights in the woods and claiming someone was watching her. The final call captured her saying, "There's something wrong here. The road, it's not the same road I was just on." Her phone went dead. Rebecca's car was found the next morning, engine still running, driver's door open. Rebecca was never seen again. Local resident Maria Santos has lived near Shades of Death Road her entire life. Her family's property borders the road, and she's witnessed dozens of search parties over the decades. "My grandmother used to say the road was cursed from the day they built it," Maria explains. She claimed they built it over old burial grounds, but I think the truth is worse. I think they built it as a burial ground. The Santos family keeps detailed records of unexplained incidents. Their logs document strange lights that move through the trees without any apparent source, vehicles that appear to drive the wrong direction on one-way stretches, and people who walk along the roadside despite being miles from any house or business. Most disturbing are the repeat sightings, the same figures appearing year after year, unchanged by time. Emergency responders have developed their own unofficial protocols for Shades of Death Road calls. Paramedic James Wheeler, who has worked the area for 15 years, explains, "We never respond to calls on that road with fewer than 2 vehicles. Too many times, the first responder on scene reports finding nothing. No accident, no broken down vehicle, no person in distress. But the 911 calls are real. Someone is calling for help. We just can't find them." The road's reputation has attracted paranormal investigators, true crime enthusiasts, and thrill seekers from around the world. But their presence has complicated police investigations and potentially endangered more lives. In 2019, a group of YouTube ghost hunters vanished while filming overnight on Shades of Death Road. Their abandoned equipment was found the next morning, cameras still recording. The final footage shows the group walking into the woods, following what appears to be the sound of someone calling for help. They can be heard responding to questions, but no other voices are audible on the recording. What makes Shades of Death Road particularly terrifying is how it seems to blur the line between legend and reality. Are the disappearances the work of human predators using local folklore as camouflage? Or is there something about certain stretches of American road that actively attracts tragedy and violence? Our next chapter examines highways where the very nature of reality seems to break down, where time itself becomes a weapon. In the vast emptiness of Arizona's desert highways, where the horizon stretches endlessly in every direction and the nearest town might be 100 miles away, travelers report experiences that challenge our understanding of reality itself. Highway 87, running north-south of the heart of the Sonoran Desert, has become ground zero for some of the most bizarre disappearances in American history. Cases where people don't just vanish, but seem to slip through cracks in time itself. The phenomenon began attracting official attention in 1987, when Arizona State Police received dozens of reports from travelers claiming to have lost time while driving Highway 87. Initially dismissed as fatigue-related confusion or drug use, the reports shared disturbing similarities. Drivers would enter a specific stretch of highway near mile marker 97, then find themselves hundreds of miles away with no memory of the journey and several hours missing from their lives. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, A psychiatrist who has studied these cases for over 2 decades describes a consistent pattern. Subjects report normal driving conditions one moment, then suddenly find themselves pulled over on an unfamiliar stretch of road with no memory of how they got there. Their fuel gauge shows impossible readings. Sometimes more gas than when they started, sometimes completely empty despite having filled up recently. Most disturbing, their watches and car clocks show different times, suggesting they've lost anywhere from 2 to 8 hours. The case that brought national attention to Highway 87 occurred in September 1994. Margaret and Robert Williams, a retired couple from Phoenix, were driving to Flagstaff for their anniversary. They called their daughter from a rest stop near mile marker 95, confirming they'd arrived by 6 p.m. When they didn't appear by midnight, family members called the police. The Williams were found 3 days later, sitting in their car in a McDonald's parking lot in Tucson, nearly 200 miles in the wrong direction from their intended destination. They had no memory of turning around, recalls Detective Mike Sandoval, who worked the case. Their odometer showed they'd driven over 800 miles, but the route from Phoenix to Tucson is only 120 miles. Mrs. Williams insisted they'd only been driving for a few hours, but their car showed evidence of much longer travel. Insects splattered on the windshield from different climate zones, red dirt in the tire treads that didn't match soil from either Phoenix or Tucson. More disturbing are the cases where travelers report gaining time rather than losing it. In 2008, long-haul trucker James Morrison left Los Angeles bound for Albuquerque, a trip that should take approximately 12 hours. He called his dispatcher from Highway 87, reporting normal driving conditions and estimating arrival by morning. 6 hours later, Morrison called again from Albuquerque, claiming he'd just arrived. GPS tracking confirmed his truck had somehow covered a 14-hour journey in just 6 hours, maintaining legal speed limits the entire time. Local Native American communities have long avoided certain sections of Highway 87. Speaking of thin places where the desert reaches into other worlds, Hopi elder Thomas Naminga explains, "Our grandparents knew there were places where time moves differently, where the spirits of ancient travelers still walk the same paths." The highway was built through one of these places. Modern people drive through barriers our ancestors knew better than to cross. The most chilling cases involve complete disappearances. Maria Gonzalez vanished in 2015 while driving Highway 87 from Tucson to Phoenix. Her cell phone continued pinging towers along the route for 3 days after her disappearance, suggesting her phone was still traveling the highway even though search teams found no trace of her vehicle. The final ping came from a cell tower that had been demolished 5 years earlier. Federal investigators have struggled to explain these phenomena. GPS tracking systems malfunction in specific zones along the highway. Radio communications cut out at predictable mile markers. Even satellite imagery of the area shows anomalies, stretches of road that appear differently in photos taken minutes apart, shadows that fall in impossible directions, and occasional images that seem to show vehicles that aren't visible to ground observers. Search and Rescue Coordinator Elena Martinez has led dozens of operations along Highway 87. We found cars that appear to have been driving in circles for days, with impossible mileage readings and evidence of extended travel through terrain that doesn't exist along the highway. We found personal belongings scattered along the roadside in patterns that suggest people were moving in multiple directions simultaneously. And we've never found the people themselves. The psychological impact on families is devastating. Unlike traditional missing person cases, Highway 87 disappearances offer no closure, no clear point where hope should transition to grief. Linda Reeves has spent 6 years searching for her husband David, who vanished while driving home from work along Highway 87. The not knowing is torture, she explains. But what's worse is wondering if he's still out there somewhere, still driving, still looking for a way home. What if he's trapped in some version of the highway that only exists in the spaces between seconds? And then there's a highway where evil doesn't just claim victims. It follows him home. The Alaska Highway stretches 1,387 miles through some of North America's most isolated wilderness, connecting Dawson Creek, British Columbia, to Delta Junction, Alaska. Built during World War II as a military supply route, this remote stretch of asphalt has become synonymous with tragedy, particularly for indigenous women and girls who have vanished without a trace along its desolate miles. While technically extending into Canada, the American portions of this highway system and the parallel Highway of Tears in British Columbia represent one of the most systematic failures of law enforcement in North American history. Since 1970, over 80 indigenous women and girls have disappeared or been murdered along these connected routes, with many more cases likely unreported due to jurisdictional complications and historical mistrust between Native communities and law enforcement. The cases share disturbing patterns that suggest both predatory behavior and institutional neglect. Victims are predominantly young indigenous women, often hitchhiking or walking alone along isolated stretches of highway. Their disappearances receive minimal media attention and inadequate police investigation. When bodies are found, often years later and hundreds of miles from where victims were last seen, physical evidence has been destroyed by weather and wildlife, making prosecution nearly impossible. Lisa Marie Young was 21 years old when she vanished near Prince George, British Columbia, in 2002 after accepting a ride from strangers. Her case exemplifies the systemic failures that have allowed predators to operate with impunity along these highways. Initial police response was slow and inadequate, treating Lisa's disappearance as a voluntary missing person case despite clear evidence of foul play. Her family's desperate search efforts were met with bureaucratic indifference and thinly veiled racism. They told us Lisa probably just went to Vancouver to party, recalls her mother, Joanne Young. They said indigenous girls go missing all the time, like that was supposed to be some kind of comfort. They didn't start a real investigation until we raised hell in the media, and by then it was too late. The trail was cold. The emotional impact extends beyond individual families to entire communities. In many indigenous villages along the highway, parents live in constant fear, knowing that their daughters face uniquely dangerous risks simply by existing in their traditional territories. Young women alter their entire lives around avoiding the highway, refusing jobs, educational opportunities, and health care that would require travel along these routes. Detective Sergeant Wayne Clary worked these cases for over 20 years before retiring in frustration. The highway creates perfect hunting conditions for predators, he explains. Vast distances between communities, limited police presence, victims from marginalized populations who might not be reported missing immediately, and jurisdictional complications that can delay investigations for weeks. By the time we get involved, crime scenes were contaminated and witnesses were scattered across 3 provinces. The few successful prosecutions reveal the true scope of the horror. In 2007, Robert Pickton was convicted of murdering 6 women, though investigators believe he killed dozens more. Many of his victims had connections to the Highway of Tears corridor, suggesting his farm was just one disposal site in a much larger network of predatory violence. Evidence found at Pickton's property included personal belongings from women who had vanished along the highway dating back to the 1980s. More disturbing still are the cases where multiple serial killers appear to have operated simultaneously along the same routes. DNA evidence from unsolved murders has identified at least 4 different perpetrators active between 1990 and 2010, suggesting the highway attracted predators who understood its particular vulnerabilities. Some investigators believe these killers may have communicated with each other, sharing information about police patrol patterns and safe disposal sites. The physical isolation of the highway creates psychological terror that extends far beyond the actual crimes. Truck driver Maria Gonzalez, who has driven northern routes for 15 years, describes the constant anxiety. You know that every hitchhiker you pass might be someone's daughter who never makes it home. You know that every time you stop for gas at 3 a.m., you might be the last person to see someone alive. And you know that if something happens to you out there, it might be months before anyone finds your body. Recent efforts to address the crisis have yielded mixed results. The creation of joint task forces between Canadian and American law enforcement has improved information sharing, but the fundamental problems remain. The highway still stretches through hundreds of miles of uninhabited wilderness, where crimes can occur without witnesses. Indigenous communities still face systemic discrimination that affects how their missing members are prioritized by police. And predators still understand that certain highways offer opportunity for violence with minimal risk of consequences. But in one American town, a single stretch of road manages to combine all these horrors, legend, systematic violence, and law enforcement failure, into something that defies both explanation and justice. Interstate 70 cuts a diagonal slash across America's heartland, connecting Utah to Maryland through some of the most isolated terrain in the continental United States. But between 1992 and 2004, this highway became the hunting ground for what FBI profilers believe was one of the most methodical and geographically dispersed serial killers in American history. The I-70 Strangler, never identified or caught, turned America's interstate system into a 2,000-mile crime scene. The killer's method was consistent and terrifying. He targeted lone travelers at rest stops and gas stations along I-70, particularly during overnight hours when facilities were minimally staffed and security cameras were rare or non-functional. Victims were found days or weeks later at locations hundreds of miles from where they were last seen, showing signs of prolonged captivity and torture before being strangled with climbing rope. The killer's mobility and careful selection of disposal sites across multiple states created jurisdictional nightmares that prevented coordinated investigation for years. Rebecca Martinez, a sociology professor studying highway crime patterns, describes the I-70 case as a perfect storm of predatory opportunity. The killer understood something crucial about American law enforcement. We're organized by geography, but highway crimes transcend geography. A body found in Colorado might have been murdered in Kansas and dumped by someone living in Utah. By the time investigators from 3 states coordinate their efforts, physical evidence has degraded and witness memories have faded. The case that broke the investigation wide open occurred in March 1999. Jennifer Walsh, a 23-year-old graduate student, vanished from a rest stop near Salina, Kansas. Unlike previous victims, Jennifer had called her roommate just minutes before her disappearance, describing a man who had been watching her from across the parking lot. "He's just standing there staring," she told her friend. "There's something wrong with his eyes." The call ended abruptly. Jennifer's body was found 6 weeks later in a remote canyon in Colorado, nearly 400 miles from where she'd disappeared. But this time, the killer had made a mistake. Forensic analysis revealed tire tracks leading to the disposal site, tracks that matched a specific type of truck tire sold only at certain dealerships. The investigation eventually traced the tires to a purchase made in Oklahoma City, but the buyer had used a fake identity and paid cash. What made the I-70 Strangler particularly terrifying wasn't just his mobility. It was how he seemed to understand and exploit the weaknesses of interstate law enforcement. Bodies were always dumped just inside state lines, ensuring maximum jurisdictional confusion. Victims were selected from states different from where their bodies were found, complicating missing person investigations. And the killer's timing was precise, targeting travelers during shift changes at police stations and during periods when highway patrol presence was minimal. Former FBI behavioral analyst David Kim spent 8 years working the I-70 case before retiring in frustration. "This wasn't a disorganized killer acting on impulse," he explains. "This was someone who studied law enforcement procedures, who understood how we investigate these crimes, and who deliberately structured his attacks to exploit our limitations. He turned our own systems against us." The psychological terror extended beyond individual victims to entire communities along I-70. Truck stops reported significant drops in overnight customers as word spread about the disappearances. Travel guides began warning against solo travel along certain stretches of the highway. Gas stations installed additional security measures and implemented buddy systems for employees working alone. Local law enforcement officers developed their own informal networks to share information outside official channels. Detective Sarah Thompson, who worked multiple I-70 cases in Colorado, recalls, "We started calling each other directly when we found bodies or had suspicious disappearances. We couldn't wait for federal coordination or interstate task forces. By the time official reports were filed and jurisdictional questions were resolved, the killer could be 3 states away." The most disturbing discovery came in 2003, when construction workers expanding an I-70 rest stop in Kansas found human remains buried beneath the original parking lot. Forensic analysis suggested the body had been there since the early 1990s, predating the official start of the I-70 investigation by several years. This finding forced investigators to acknowledge a terrifying possibility. The killer they've been tracking for over a decade might have been active much longer, with dozens of additional victims buried along the highway system. The I-70 Strangler case officially went cold in 2004 when a pattern of murders suddenly stopped. But law enforcement officials disagree about whether this indicates the killer's death, imprisonment for other crimes, or simply a change in operational methods. Some investigators believe the killer may have shifted to different highways or altered his victim selection to avoid detection. The emotional toll on families remains devastating 2 decades later. Patricia Williams has spent 15 years searching for answers about her daughter Amanda's disappearance from an I-70 rest stop in 2008. Every time I drive on the interstate, I look for her, Patricia explains. I know it's irrational, but part of me believes she's still out there somewhere, still trying to get home. The not knowing is a special kind of hell, which leaves us with one final, haunting question about America's most dangerous roads. After examining dozens of highways, hundreds of disappearances, and thousands of miles of American asphalt, we're left with a question that has no comfortable answer. Is it the killers who are drawn to these roads, or do the roads themselves somehow attract killers? The statistical evidence is undeniable. Certain stretches of American highway experience disappearances and violent crimes at rates that far exceed national averages, even when controlling for traffic volume, population density, and economic factors. These roads share common characteristics: isolation, limited law enforcement presence, and proximity to disposal sites. But they also share something more elusive and disturbing: a reputation that precedes rational explanation. Dr. Sarah Martinez, who has studied highway crime patterns for over 2 decades, offers a chilling perspective. We've identified geographic clusters of violence that persist across generations of criminals. When one predator is caught or dies, another seems to take his place on the same highways. It's as if certain roads create their own criminal ecosystems. The psychological impact extends far beyond crime statistics. These highways have altered American travel patterns, changed how we think about road trips, and forced families to navigate a landscape where legend and reality intertwine in terrifying ways. Parents teach their children to avoid certain routes. Truckers develop informal networks to share safety information. Entire communities live under the shadow of roads that seem to consume people. The families who have lost loved ones to these highways carry a unique burden. Unlike other forms of violent crime, highway disappearances often provide no closure, no clear answers, and no sense of justice. Bodies are found years later in remote locations. If they're found at all, evidence is destroyed by weather and time. Killers remain free, protected by the very isolation that made their crimes possible. Maria Santos, whose sister vanished on Clinton Road in 1994, speaks for thousands of families. We're still waiting, still hoping, still driving past those woods, and wondering if she's out there somewhere. The road took her, but it won't give her back. And we don't know if we're mourning the dead or searching for the living. The bureaucratic failures that enable these crimes continue largely unchanged. Jurisdictional boundaries still complicate investigations. Missing persons from marginalized communities still receive inadequate attention. And the vast scale of America's highway system still provides perfect cover for predators who understand how to exploit our transportation infrastructure. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of America's haunted highways is how they reflect broader societal failures. The roads where people disappear are often the same routes where indigenous women face systematic violence, where sex workers are criminalized rather than protected, where hitchhikers and homeless individuals are dismissed as high-risk victims whose disappearances matter less. These highways have become mirrors that reflect our deepest failures of justice and protection. They show us a country where isolation equals vulnerability, where certain lives are considered expendable, and where the infrastructure we built to connect communities has instead created hunting grounds for those who prey on the vulnerable. The ghost stories and paranormal legends associated with these roads serve a psychological function. They allow us to imagine supernatural explanations for very human failures. It's more comfortable to believe in cursed highways and to confront the reality that our systems of law enforcement social support, and criminal justice have failed so completely that predators can operate with near impunity across thousands of miles of American road. As we reach the end of our journey through America's most haunted highways, we're left not with answers, but with the weight of all the questions that remain unresolved. Personally, I will say maybe the real horror isn't the ghosts, but the fact that so many vanish and justice never follows. Would you dare drive down these roads at night? Comment your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you want more chilling true stories. See you next time